Jake had successfully avoided Nurse Lysa for 4 months, until she cornered him in the hallway with a smile that promised consequences, and when she locked the exam room door behind them, he realized running was no longer an option. His heart pounded like a drumroll as his eyes darted around the sterile white walls of exam room 3. The smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, mingling uncomfortably with something else, a faint trace of lavender and silver that made him feel strangely out of sorts. "Lieutenant Morrison," Nurse Lysa said softly from across the room, her voice like velvet wrapping over the sharp edges of reality. "You can relax now." Jake swallowed hard, trying to find his footing in this surreal scenario. He had been dodging these checkups for months, knowing she made him feel things he wasn't entirely comfortable with. "What's going on?" His words came out shaky and uncertain, which was not like him at all. The Lieutenant Jake Morrison everyone knew was confident and unwavering, but around Lysa Vorthane, he turned into a mess of nerves and stammering doubts. Lysa crossed her arms over her chest, leaning against the wall near the door with an amused glint in her violet eyes. "A routine physical, just like I've been telling you," she said patiently, but there was something in her tone that hinted at more than a simple medical checkup. "I'm not feeling well today," Jake offered lamely, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them behind his back. Her smile widened into an almost knowing smirk. "You haven't been feeling well for 4 months now. It's time to address it." Jake gulped down the sudden wave of anxiety that surged through him. He couldn't deny Lysa's intuition anymore. She had always managed to read him like a book, even when he tried so hard not to let her. "Why me?" Jake asked, trying desperately to divert attention from his discomfort with banter. "Every other nurse on the station would have done the checkup." Her eyes softened slightly, but remained sharp and calculating. She knew exactly what she was doing. No more games for him today. "You know why," she replied simply. Jake's pulse raced as he tried to shake off the heat creeping up his neck and into his cheeks. He didn't want to think about those reasons, especially not in this room that smelled so much like her presence. "Look," Jake started again, but faltered mid-sentence when Lysa took a step forward, crossing the distance between them at an alarming pace for someone who could have easily outrun him with just one long stride. "I'm here to do my job," she said calmly yet firmly, as if sensing his thoughts. "Relax and let me help you." Jake's eyes darted away from her, down at his feet before settling back on her face again, where they belonged, although he wished they didn't. Lysa moved closer still until there was barely a centimeter between them, her hand reaching out to rest gently against the wall beside Jake's shoulder. Her touch wasn't aggressive, it felt more like she was trying to soothe his nerves, or perhaps make him see that everything would be okay if he just let himself trust. "Just a standard checkup," Lysa repeated softly, this time as though reciting from memory, her eyes boring deeply into his with an intensity that made his mind short-circuit. "Why are you so nervous?" Jake's breath hitched in his throat. The only thing preventing him from fleeing was knowing he couldn't escape now anyway, not when she had already locked them both inside together. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles whitening as if they could hold back all of the conflicting emotions threatening to spill out. "I don't know," Jake admitted finally, voice cracking a little with the strain of honesty and uncertainty mixed in equal parts. Lysa's lips curved upwards ever so slightly at his vulnerability, but there was no trace of mockery or pity on her face, just understanding and something more difficult for him to place. "Relax, Lieutenant," she murmured soothingly. "Again, close your eyes." Jake's instincts screamed no, but the way Lysa said it made it sound almost like a command from one commanding officer to another, so he complied without thinking too much about why. Closing his eyes brought everything inside him rushing up and out, all those months of avoiding her caught in a single gasping breath held between them. When Jake opened his eyes again, she was looking at him with an expression that seemed almost tender despite the professional mask still firmly in place on her features. "Now, let's begin," Lysa said gently, guiding him to lie down on the examination table where he would have been forced into vulnerability no matter what happened next. Lysa stood beside Jake as he sat on one of the station's examination chairs, trying to maintain a semblance of military composure that was quickly unraveling under her steady gaze. She picked up the medical scanner and began by placing it gently against his wrist. "Blood pressure elevated," she announced calmly, after scanning him for just a moment. "Heart rate racing." Her sharp violet eyes flicked over to look directly into Jake's nervous green ones as the device continued its readout. Jake felt himself flush under her scrutiny, but tried not to let it show too much on his face. He could feel Lysa's intense awareness of him, the way she seemed able to see through every defensive tactic he had developed for avoiding these moments. Skin temperature rising, she added with an almost smug smile playing at the corners of her lips, as if she was enjoying watching this human male squirm under her perceptiveness. "Your vitals are concerning, Lieutenant. You seem to be experiencing significant stress response." Jake's mouth went dry, and he swallowed hard before trying again to deflect with a light-hearted tone that didn't come naturally when his mind felt anything but light or hearted at the moment. "It must just be nerves," Jake stammered out, hoping it sounded convincing enough, even as it rang hollowly in both their ears. "I'm not good around medical procedures." Lysa took another step closer to him now, her long legs making short work of covering any distance between them despite his attempt at retreating into the chair by sinking lower and deeper with every breath he drew. "Strange," she commented softly, as if considering something out loud rather than speaking directly to him. "Your stress indicators spike every time you see me, even before I touch you." Her eyes never left his, gauging his reaction carefully now that they were down to the barest inches separating them. Jake's face went pale, and he looked away quickly, as if trying not to meet her gaze any longer than necessary, even though it was a futile effort once she had him cornered like this. I mean," he trailed off, struggling for words, but coming up empty-handed against his usual confidence when faced with such scrutiny. Lysa leaned in closer still, so that their noses were nearly touching now, and her hand rested lightly against the wall next to Jake's shoulder. It was a gesture meant to soothe, and yet it felt more like she had him pinned there. No escape from this moment of truth, no matter how hard he tried or how long had been avoiding. "I'm here to do my job," Lysa said calmly, but with an unmistakable firmness that made Jake's heart rate climb even further despite her soothing tone. "Relax, and let me help you." Jake's eyes darted away from hers, down at his feet before settling back on her face again, where they belonged although he wished they didn't. Her hand reached out gently to rest against the wall beside him, just an inch or two away from making physical contact with his skin, but it felt like a pressure all its own nonetheless. "Just a standard checkup," she repeated softly this time, as though reciting from memory, her eyes boring deeply into his with an intensity that made his mind short-circuit. "Why are you so nervous?" Lysa's voice was low and almost hypnotic in the way it held him there, like some sort of spellbinding question he couldn't help but answer, even when every fiber inside him screamed not to be pinned down or analyzed again. Jake's breath hitched in his throat, knowing full well that now he couldn't escape from this room if he wanted to, at least not until the checkup was completed. "Look, I don't know," Jake admitted finally, as his hands clenched into fists and his knuckles went white with the effort of holding back all conflicting emotions threatening to spill out in waves. Lysa's lips curved upwards ever so slightly, but there was no trace of mockery or pity on her face, just understanding, something more difficult for him to place right then and there between them. "Relax, Lieutenant," she murmured soothingly, again, as if offering some sort of comfort despite the physical proximity threatening to overwhelm him otherwise. Her tone made it sound almost like a command from one commanding officer to another, so he complied without thinking too much about why, closing his eyes briefly against her piercing gaze and all that it implied. Closing them brought everything rushing up between them months worth of avoidance caught in just one gasping breath held tautly between them. When Jake opened his eyes again, she was looking at him with an expression that seemed almost tender despite the professional mask still firmly in place on her features. "Now, let's begin," Lysa said gently, but with a definite finality to it, as if this moment had been building towards just one possible outcome all along, and there were no more distractions allowed now. She guided Jake towards lying down upon the examination table, where he could feel his vulnerability pressed up against each inch of metal beneath him. The act felt almost like surrendering control, but also acceptance that sometimes you have to face things head on, even when they scare or confuse you deeply on every level imaginable. "Let's get started," Lysa said firmly, her tone leaving no room for doubt about how this was going to proceed despite Jake's lingering anxiety. "Just relax and let me do my job." Jake nodded numbly as he lay down fully, trying not to think too much about what might come next or why it suddenly felt like the weight of all his pent-up emotions were pressing heavily against him now that there wasn't any more room for avoidance left within this small space. Jake's hands were still clenched into tight fists as he lay down on the cold metal examination table, his heart pounding in his chest like a drumroll to some nerve-wracking drama. He felt Lysa's eyes follow him, her gaze steady and unyielding, sending shivers up his spine that had nothing to do with the chill of the room. "Relax, Lieutenant," she repeated softly, again, as if trying to soothe away not just the tension in his body, but also whatever internal chaos was clashing within him. "Now let's begin." Her voice carried an undeniable authority, a command laced with understanding and patience. Jake could feel himself melting under her gaze, every inch of resistance crumbling before he even had time to properly form it. Lysa stepped closer, her silver hair brushing against the collar of his dress uniform as she moved behind him to adjust his position on the table. He felt her hands gently guiding his legs apart and settling them into place with a quiet efficiency that spoke volumes about how often this ritual was performed, just not in quite such an intimate setting. "Just relax," she murmured once more, her breath warm against his neck as he tried to follow her advice. The sensation of her presence, so close, made it difficult for him to think straight. All rational thought seemed to be clouded by the intensity of her nearness, and the way every nerve ending was firing off signals like a nervous system gone wild. Jake nodded stiffly, trying to release some semblance of control over his racing heart. He closed his eyes again briefly, as if seeking refuge from reality itself, but when he opened them once more, Lysa's face hovered just inches away, her expression now one that seemed to hold an unspoken weight between them. "You're right," Jake began finally, his voice sounding raw and hesitant even in his own ears. "I've been avoiding you because, well, I can't deny it anymore." The admission felt like a release of pent-up tension, but also something heavier lifting off his chest at the same time. Lysa's gaze softened ever so slightly before she leaned back to retrieve her medical tools from the nearby counter. She was methodical in her actions, as if this moment required more distance between them than mere physical space alone could provide. "Lieutenant," she began once again, her voice now holding a mix of professionalism and something deeper, something he couldn't quite decipher yet. "I am an empath." Jake's eyes shot back to hers instantly at those words. Had heard them before but never fully understood what they meant until this moment when the implications seemed to sink in. Could sense his emotions. She knew exactly how much of a mess he was inside. Lysa continued, as if reading his thoughts aloud, with her expression remaining unchanged despite the revelation she had just imparted. "I have been sensing your emotional state for 4 months now." Her voice remained calm, measured almost as though trying to keep herself steady amidst whatever storm brewed beneath their interaction. "And you are attracted to me." Jake's throat went dry at those words, every muscle in his body tensing up once more before he could stop himself from reacting. It was like she had laid out the bare truth of everything that had been between them without any pretense or room for denial. "I didn't think," Jake managed through gritted teeth, feeling exposed and vulnerable, as if standing naked under her steady gaze. "You'd ever be interested in someone like me?" His words sounded lame, even to his own ears, but they were true. Nonetheless, thought of this graceful alien being having any kind of interest back towards him felt like a fantasy too good to admit. Laysa let out an almost imperceptible sigh, lowering herself down onto the stool position beside the examination table. She folded her legs neatly beneath her before crossing them and placing both elbows on her knees in front of her with hands clasped together thoughtfully between them. "You did not think I could be interested?" she repeated gently now, as if trying to gauge his emotions directly rather than just observe their effects externally. Her sharp violet eyes seemed to burn into him, seeking answers hidden deep within the shadows of his own heart and mind. Jake's breath hitched in response. He couldn't look away from her, even though doing so would have been infinitely easier right then. I didn't think it mattered," Jake admitted finally with another nod, as if giving up on fighting against whatever was happening now between them, embracing instead the unexpected clarity of truth. Laysa's lips curved upwards slightly. At that admission, a soft smile tinged with a hint of amusement and perhaps something more personal underneath. "Lieutenant Morrison." Her voice softened again, but carried an underlying tone of authority, one he had come to recognize as hers alone within this sterile environment they found themselves in now. "Would you like me to recommend treatment?" The words hung between them for what felt like hours, even though it was probably only a moment's pause before Jake could react. It took him longer than it should have, but eventually he nodded stiffly again, his body language mirroring the struggle within his mind and heart, as if offering some sort of silent capitulation to whatever this new beginning might mean. "Treatment?" he managed finally through numb lips that felt dry and cracked somehow despite all the moisture dripping down inside him right then. It was a loaded question, one full of implications he wasn't sure how to unpack or even fully understand yet, but here it stood between them, nonetheless, a stark reminder perhaps that sometimes avoiding reality only delays its inevitable arrival. "Yes," Laysa confirmed gently now, as if sensing exactly what this moment meant for both of them despite any outward show put on otherwise. "You have been causing yourself undue stress by your avoidance." Her tone softened again, more like a concerned friend than the commanding officer she was supposed to be here within these walls. "Allow me," Laysa continued softly, but with an unyielding finality about it now, as if this moment had been building towards exactly such an outcome all along, "to diagnose and treat." Jake's heart thumped heavily in his chest at those words. His whole body felt like a tight coil of tension ready to snap, yet also strangely relieved somehow that he didn't have to face whatever was coming next alone. "Okay," Jake managed finally with another nod, as if surrendering control once more, but this time embracing it fully instead. "Let's do it." And so she began, with the same clinical precision and quiet confidence that had always set her apart from others in their station. But now there seemed to be something different about how those actions played out, a new layer of intention beneath them perhaps that made every touch feel more intimate than before. "First," Laysa said, as if beginning a lecture on medicine, but with the same personal quality underlying each word, "we need to address your physical symptoms." Jake's eyes followed her movements closely now, the way she moved around him like an intricate dance of science and care, guiding instruments over his body without ever losing that steady gaze or sense of purpose in doing so. "Relax," Laysa murmured again, as if repeating some mantra between them both. "You are safe here." Those simple words seemed to resonate deep within Jake's mind, even though he knew logically this was just a checkup, yet somehow hearing her say it made everything feel less daunting, more manageable perhaps than before. Laysa continued with the exam efficiently, but now there were moments where she paused longer over certain areas, as if seeking out something beneath his skin that wasn't purely physical at all. "Your stress levels are quite high," she noted aloud as much to herself as anyone else present. It seemed a statement made without judgment, yet carrying an unspoken question hanging heavy between them. Jake's breath caught in response, a very muscle taut once more before settling back into submission beneath her hands, and words alike, each one feeling like a revelation of some kind now unfolding bit by bit. "I know," he admitted softly, eyes never leaving hers despite the vulnerability of his confession here and now. Lysa nodded solemnly, as if accepting this truth from both of them equally, even though it had been hidden so long beneath surface appearances before today's encounter changed everything, perhaps forever, between them. She finished up her examination quickly then, but left room for silence to settle comfortably around them like a blanket, easing tensions where none should exist in such an environment traditionally. "Well," Lysa began softly now, as if breaking some spell or seal set earlier within this small space of their reality, "your physical health is stable aside from these stress-induced fluctuations." Jake's eyes widened slightly at the directness of her words, but there was no judgment there, just understanding, and perhaps something more he couldn't quite put a finger on yet. However, Lysa continued softly, placing one hand gently against his shoulder in an unspoken gesture, offering comfort rather than mere diagnosis. "Your emotional state needs attention as well." Jake felt the warmth of her touch seep through his uniform, even though it was just a fleeting press of fingers against skin. Somehow, it made everything feel more real, somehow, beyond whatever had been happening here so far. Lysa's eyes met his again, then her expression holding an unspoken promise, perhaps something deeper than either could fully articulate or admit yet, but felt profoundly important nonetheless. "Would you like to talk about this?" Jake's breath caught once more at the implication of her question, a door opening unexpectedly wide into a future neither had anticipated or planned for before today. I don't know," Jake admitted honestly, feeling raw and exposed, as if standing in front of some grand truth he hadn't wanted, but now found himself facing head on regardless. "But maybe." Lysa's lips curved upwards again, ever so slightly, a soft smile that seemed to hold all the answers without needing words spoken aloud, yet still managed somehow to light up everything around them like a beacon breaking through shadows. "Then let us," Lysa began gently then, her voice carrying an unspoken invitation towards something both new and profound, perhaps waiting just beyond whatever boundaries had existed between them thus far. "Begin that conversation." Jake's breath caught again, his heart pounding in his chest as he nodded stiffly once more, but this time with a newfound resolve within him somehow. The weight of avoiding reality lifted off shoulders long overdue for acceptance rather than escape. "Okay," Jake managed finally, feeling oddly empowered by the admission and invitation alike, even though everything about it felt so unfamiliar yet undeniably right in some inexplicable way. "Let's start." And with those words hanging between them, like threads woven tightly together into fabric of something new, forming perhaps beyond whatever constraints had defined their relationship thus far, the future stretched out before them, both promising possibilities neither could fully comprehend, but embraced nonetheless. Lysa nodded solemnly then, her expression softening further, as if acknowledging some silent contract now binding them together despite any outward appearances or roles either played within this sterile environment. "Let us begin," she repeated gently, again, as though reciting from memory, a ritual long practiced yet newly relevant perhaps amidst whatever truths were being laid bare between them here and now. Jake's eyes met hers fully, then holding that gaze like an unspoken vow exchanged without words needed. Everything felt different somehow, but also perfectly aligned with some underlying truth both of them had finally dared to admit into the light of day. "Okay," he repeated softly again, feeling strangely at peace despite whatever lay ahead, perhaps beyond just this moment alone. "Let's start." Jake's heart pounded against his ribcage as Nurse Lysa Vorthane closed in on him like a predator closing in on its prey, her sharp violet eyes piercing through the layers of his uniform and straight into his soul. He was cornered against the cold metal exam table, his back pressed firmly to it, each breath he took coming out shallow and uneven. "Lieutenant," Lysa began smoothly, but with an underlying edge that sent a shiver down Jake's spine, "let me offer my own diagnosis." She moved even closer now, her elegant figure framed by the dim lights of the medical bay. He could feel her presence, like a tangible force pressing in on him from all sides. "I have been trying to get you alone for months," she continued softly but clearly, her voice sending ripples through his nerves. "You are kind and brave, both admirable traits." She paused briefly, allowing those words to sink into the tension between them, before continuing, "But let me be clear, you are also terrible at reading signals." Jake's throat dried out instantly. He was pretty sure she could hear it too by the small smirk that tugged at her lips. "You avoid me at every chance you get," Lysa continued, each word slicing through him like a blade. Her hand reached up to rest gently on his shoulder, a fleeting press of fingers against skin, at warmth seeping in even though their contact was brief and clinical. "I sense your attraction from across the room. Sometimes it's so strong it gives me headaches." The corners of her lips quirked upwards ever so slightly at that last part, as if amused by something she had observed but hadn't shared until now. "And yet you run away." Jake felt his cheeks flush with heat, both embarrassment and confusion mixed in equal parts. He was so used to being the one giving orders or taking charge on missions. Here he was reduced to a blushing mess, stammering and stuttering whenever she got too close. "Lieutenant," Lysa said again, her voice dropping from its clinical tone into something more personal now, soft yet firm. "This is frustrating for us both." Her gaze locked onto his, as if trying to burn through any remaining barriers between them. "I am going to prescribe a treatment for our condition, unless you have objections." Jake's breath caught in his throat once more. The air around him felt charged with unspoken truths and promises, heavy like fog rolling in before dawn breaks. "Why, your diagnosis," he began nervously, fumbling over his words. "It's fair enough," Jake managed to say after a moment of hesitation. There was something compelling about her tone, almost as if she held all the answers within those sharp violet eyes and cool demeanor, or a challenge laid out before him without ever needing to be spoken aloud. Lysa nodded once, sharply yet gently satisfied that he had acknowledged what needed addressing despite whatever discomfort lingered beneath his bravado. "Then let us begin," she said simply but firmly, as if speaking both to him and herself about moving forward past the awkwardness hanging between them like a fog. "Would you?" Lysa began again slowly, her sharp violet eyes meeting Jake's with an intensity that left no room for misunderstanding. "Like to talk about this?" Jake felt himself swallowing hard. At those words everything seemed to pause around him, as if waiting for his response. The implications of what she was asking sank in bit by bit. It was more than just a medical checkup now, something new and profound, forming perhaps beyond whatever boundaries had existed between them thus far. I don't know," Jake admitted honestly, feeling raw and exposed, as if standing before some grand truth he hadn't wanted but now found himself facing head on regardless. "But maybe." Lysa's lips curved upwards again, ever so slightly, a soft smile that seemed to hold all the answers without needing words spoken aloud, yet still managed somehow to light up everything around them like a beacon breaking through shadows. "Then let us," Lysa began gently then, her voice carrying an unspoken invitation towards something both new and profound, perhaps waiting just beyond whatever constraints had defined their relationship thus far. "Begin that conversation." Jake's breath caught once more, his heart pounding in his chest, as he nodded stiffly once more, but this time with a newfound resolve within him. Somehow, the weight of avoiding reality lifted off shoulders long overdue for acceptance rather than escape. "Okay," Jake managed finally, feeling oddly empowered by the admission and invitation alike, even though everything about it felt so unfamiliar yet undeniably right in some inexplicable way. "Let's start." Lysa nodded solemnly, then her expression softening further, as if acknowledging some silent contract now binding them together despite any outward appearances or roles either played within this sterile environment. "Then let us begin," she repeated gently, again, as though reciting from memory, a ritual long practiced yet newly relevant perhaps amidst whatever truths were being laid bare between them here and now. Jake's eyes met hers fully, then holding that gaze, like an unspoken vow exchanged without words needed, everything felt different somehow, but also perfectly aligned with some underlying truth both of them had finally dared to admit into the light of day. "Okay," he repeated softly, again, feeling strangely at peace despite whatever lay ahead, perhaps beyond just this moment alone. "Let's start." With those final words hanging between them like threads woven tightly together into fabric of something new, forming perhaps beyond whatever constraints had defined their relationship thus far, the future stretched out before them, both promising possibilities neither could fully comprehend, but embraced nonetheless. Jake felt a sudden rush of nervousness as Lysa's eyes scanned over him, her gaze lingering in places that made his heart skip several beats at once. The room around them seemed to grow smaller, more intimate, enclosed by an invisible force field of tension and unspoken understanding. "Lieutenant Morrison," she began softly, breaking the silence with a tone so serene it sent shivers down Jake's spine. "You are here because you need this." Jake nodded mutely, his throat tight as if trying to swallow a rock. He felt like he was standing on thin ice, every step a delicate negotiation of boundaries that neither knew how to set but both were painfully aware needed setting. "Do you have any objections?" Lysa asked next, her voice steady and calm, a stark contrast against the storm brewing within him. Jake shook his head vehemently. "No, I don't," he admitted quietly, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over him at finally speaking this truth aloud. Lysa's expression softened then, a small smile playing on her lips, as if she had been waiting for these words. She stepped closer to him, no close enough that Jake could feel the warmth emanating from her body in waves intermingling with his own rising temperature and adrenaline. "Good," she murmured, her voice low but clear against his ear. "Because this," her hand slid up along his arm gently, tracing patterns of reassurance across his skin that sent electric shivers coursing through him, like some hidden rhythm awakening dormant parts of himself he hadn't even known existed until now. Jake's breath hitched at the touch, sharp and sudden as a shock wave running down his spine. He looked into Lysa's eyes then, seeing reflected there everything they both felt yet had never spoken aloud before: attraction that burned bright, but unspoken for too long, frustration masked by professionalism, and duty desire simmering beneath layers of control and restraint. "I thought you were just being professional," Jake confessed finally, his voice barely above a whisper even though the words echoed loudly within him now. The admission tasted bitter yet oddly freeing on his tongue, like tasting freedom after years of captivity inside self-imposed chains. Lysa laughed softly, thin sound that vibrated through Jake's bones and lit up her eyes like stars igniting in midnight skies. "I locked the door, Lieutenant," she said quietly, but firmly now, as if drawing an invisible line across which no one else could introduce. No distractions or interruptions allowed here, between them alone. "Professional ended 5 minutes ago." Her words hung heavily in the iris statement of both fact and intention that left Jake blinking rapidly against some newfound clarity piercing through fogged lenses. He watched Lysa move closer still now, her lips parting slightly as if preparing for something significant about to happen, and he didn't know whether to take a step back or forward into what awaited him. Her fingers brushed lightly over his shoulder necks, to feather touch that sent sparks ricocheting down Jake's spine like fireworks exploding in slow motion. "This is the first treatment," Lysa declared softly then, her violet eyes locking onto his, with an unyielding intensity he hadn't seen from her before. Her usual professionalism seemed to have melted away, revealing something far more primal beneath. Before Jake could even process what she meant, or question why it felt so right yet wrong, found himself enveloped in the sensation of Laia's lips pressing firmly against his own. The kiss was thorough, expertly executed, as if by someone who knew exactly how much pressure and movement to employ for maximum effect, sending him reeling into a world where thoughts no longer existed, only sensations. Jake's knees went weak beneath him suddenly, his body responding instinctively with a surge of heat spreading across his skin like wildfire. Every nerve ending seemed lit up by her touch, sparking tiny explosions within every cell, until all he could feel was Laia, and the taste of her lips against his own, perfectly aligned, as if made to fit together in ways they had both been waiting for, despite any doubts or fears lurking beneath their surfaces. When she pulled back finally, a breathless moment that felt like an eternity saw a soft smile playing on her face. How many follow-ups? Jake managed hoarsely, his voice barely more than air escaping him through parted lips. Laia's eyes gleamed with something unreadable but captivating, non-ether smile widening into one of genuine warmth and resolve, as if she had found exactly what she sought in that moment between them, finally breaking free from whatever constraints held back their mutual understanding. "As many as you need," she declared softly now, her hand reaching up to cup his cheek gently, a gesture both tender and commanding. "Consider it long-term care." Jake felt himself nodding dazedly, then some unspoken agreement passed silently between them, sealing this moment into something far more than just a medical appointment or an encounter. It was the beginning of understanding shared by two beings who had been circling each other for months now, feeling and sensing, but never fully daring to act until that point. With those words hanging heavy in the air, the weight of newfound possibilities stretching out before them, both like an endless expanse waiting exploration, Jake felt a sense of peace settling within him. The future stretched open ahead, offering paths neither had dared imagine only moments ago, yet now seemed perfectly clear despite any uncertainties lingering on either side. "Let's start," he murmured finally, as Laia's hand slipped from his cheek down to lace fingers tightly with his own, a bond formed not just in the moment but carrying promises of whatever lay beyond. Together they stepped forward into that future, then into a world where barriers were crumbling and truths coming out into light, embracing every step along this new path laid bare between them, finally free to follow without fear or hesitation. "Let's start," Laia echoed softly, with an unspoken vow echoing in her eyes, now matching his own resolve. Everything felt different somehow, but also perfectly aligned, as if some underlying truth had been revealed at last and embraced wholeheartedly by both of them, standing here alone together within the confines yet sanctuary offered by this room. This moment marking a new beginning for Jake Morrison and Nurse Laia Vorthane alike. Jake stepped out of the examination room an hour later, his dress uniform slightly rumpled and disheveled from his encounter with Nurse Laia Vorthane. His nerves had been shot to pieces by her unwavering gaze and expert touch, leaving him feeling as though he'd just run a marathon mentally rather than undergone a routine physical checkup. Outside the room, Commander Rachel Haley, a fellow human stationed on the medical station, waited with an amused smirk on her face. "Well?" she asked expectantly, raising an eyebrow at Jake's disheveled appearance and glazed-over eyes. Jake took a deep breath before managing to stammer out his reply. "Very thorough." Rachel chuckled softly, but nodded understandingly. She knew all about the station's chief medical officer, who had been known for her meticulous approach in patient care, but also rumored among the crew members as someone not afraid to take matters into her own hands, especially when dealing with an evasive human like Jake. "Sounds like it," she said dryly. "So what's next on your schedule?" Jake blinked rapidly before checking his wrist communicator and frowned slightly at the updates. "Follow up tomorrow, and then another one after that. Rachel's eyes widened in surprise, but a knowing smile spread across her face as comprehension dawned. The official reason was for monitoring stress levels, yet both of them knew there were far more interesting implications behind those appointments. Laysa must be really determined, Rachel observed with an amused glint in her eye. She wouldn't let you leave until she got what she wanted. Jake nodded absently, still processing everything that had transpired inside the room over the past hour. The intense emotions and undeniable chemistry between him and Nurse Forthing. He hadn't expected any of it, but couldn't deny how right it felt to finally acknowledge his long-held feelings. Yes, he agreed softly, looking down at their linked hands briefly before returning his gaze back up towards Rachel. He's done playing games. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Jake. Each scheduled appointment brought him back into the familiar yet increasingly charged atmosphere of Nurse Forthing's presence. She continued to examine him meticulously, but also took time during each session to discuss broader topics, personal concerns, future plans, even shared hopes and fears. By now, it was clear that their interaction had transcended medical boundaries long ago. Every meeting held deeper meaning than a mere health assessment could ever provide. Jake found himself growing more confident with Laysa over these sessions, while also feeling increasingly connected to her empathic touch and unerring emotional insights. During one such appointment, when she finished taking his vitals and glanced up at him with piercing violet eyes, he mustered the courage to ask about their unconventional dynamic. "Why do this?" His voice was low but steady. There wasn't any ambiguity in what needed answering now. Laysa's expression softened as her fingers brushed over his arm tenderly. "Because I can sense your feelings," she murmured gently, "and it wouldn't be right to leave them unaddressed." Jake felt a warmth spread through him at those words, realizing just how far they'd come since their initial encounters, filled with avoidance and uncertainty. 3 months later marked the end of all formal appointments, though Jake's heart still raced every time Nurse Forthing locked that door. They stopped pretending about everything in between. Relationships didn't always start from traditional courtships or grand gestures. Sometimes they bloomed amidst routine medical assessments turned intimate revelations. Now officially recorded as partners within station records, both of them knew their bond was far deeper than any formality could ever capture fully. Laysa insisted on checking his vitals every day, not just because it kept her close to him, but also because she enjoyed seeing those familiar signs of attraction flare up whenever he saw the door lock behind him. One evening, while wrapping up another routine checkup session, Jake looked at Laysa with open affection and admiration. "You know," he said thoughtfully, his green eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and wonderment, "luck had nothing to do with us being together." Laysa's lips quirked into an amused smile as she placed her hands on either side of his face, gently but firmly, her touch both reassuringly familiar yet unexpectedly tender. "Of course it didn't," she replied softly, her voice carrying a note of certainty. "I caught what I wanted long ago and you let me." Her words hung in the air, between them heavy with unspoken promises and mutual understanding. This was no coincidence or chance encounter, but rather two souls finding each other through shared vulnerability and courage. And so began their life together, starting right there within that exam room where it all started, a place of healing now transformed into sanctuary. Jake felt blessed beyond measure by the luck, yet also humbled, knowing precisely how intentional his connection with Nurse Forthing had been from day one. She was still checking on him daily. He would smile every time she locked the door, as if nothing else mattered more than that moment when they could be truly themselves together. Their hearts raced at each encounter, but now it wasn't out of fear or uncertainty. It was excitement and love sparking between them like fireworks during a celebration. As their relationship continued to grow stronger daily within this unique arrangement, Jake realized he'd found not just his soulmate, but also the courage needed to face every challenge life might throw at him, armed with Laysa by his side forevermore.